that had been 2.5 days ago. By this afternoon, she'd felt like a junkie detoxing from a long and brutal high. Her skin had buzzed and crawled, her attention had constantly wandered, and she'd vibrated with some kind of restless energy that had urged her. Hell, it had compelled her to return to the Abbey to get one more look at the statue that had her old friend in what had sounded like a heck of a tizzy. Shadows drifted past Phil as she slowly crossed the room. In the dark silence, even the cushy rubber soles of her boots made quiet padding noises against the polished marble tiles. The stillness made her soft breaths echo in her own ears, but she continued to move forward. She couldn't stop. Maybe she should have asked Ella a few more questions when her friend had first called, part of Phil acknowledged. Maybe her friend knew something about the statue that would explain this weird power it seemed to have over her. Then again, how exactly would Phil have phrased that question? "So this gargoyle you're looking for," she could imagine herself saying, "it wouldn't happen to have freaky magical powers or the ability to devour human souls, would it?" Sure, that would have made her sound perfectly sane. Of course, there was always the possibility that insanity would serve her well when she went on trial. Maybe if she pulled it off, the judge would just lock her in a loony bin for a couple of years, instead of throwing her into prison. Look on the bright side, right? Insanity might be the only logical explanation for why she was here, creeping illegally around a semi-operational historic monastery in the dead of night, just to get a private, uninterrupted look at a piece of art that really wasn't all that artful. Medievalism had never been a favorite style of Phil's. As a professional art restorationist, she'd studied or worked on creations from various historical eras, though admittedly her work focused on paintings rather than sculpture. Still, even paintings from the medieval era didn't float her boat. The figures were too stylized. They lacked the realism and dimension that the Renaissance had brought to the medium. And while she was hardly an expert in sculpture of the period, even less in architectural statuary, she'd never been a fan. Religious figures, gargoyles, and grotesques, she thought, looked fine on Gothic cathedrals, but she'd always spent more time looking at the murals inside the buildings than the carvings outside. So why did this one seem to have captured all her attention? She approached the base of the statue, the enormous hunk of slate-colored granite that served as the figure's pedestal, and wished she dared to turn on the lights. Better not to advertise her presence, but there was barely enough illumination coming in through the room's stained glass windows to navigate through the dark. She felt like one giant stubbed toe just waiting to happen. Her eyes had adjusted as well as they were likely to, so Phil circled the stone platform, trying to find the angle that shed the most light on the subject of her fascination. She found it mostly by accident, when she tripped over her own feet and caught herself by shooting a hand out to brace against the granite. Instinctively, her gaze flicked up, and she stared straight into the figure's smooth, blank eyes. Darkness hid the fine details from her, but she could make out the sharp angles of a square jaw and high, slanted cheekbones. The artist had posed his subject more like a classical archangel than a monstrous demon. Slim hips clad in the kind of paneled kilt most often seen in gladiator movies. His body poised straight and tall, with a spear held in one hand. He looked like Michael poised for battle, the way she'd seen the head of God's armies depicted in 1,000 Italian masterpieces. You know, if she ignored the claws, and the fangs, and the way his legs, jointed like a stag's, ended in giant raptor's talons. Just those few pesky details. Even the statue's enormous, mostly furled wings appeared more angelic than demonic. Heavily creased and carved as if to denote the presence of feathers, the top joints rose above the figure's head, while the trailing ends rested on the pedestal by its heels. She imagined that if the things had been real, the way they stirred the air would have more in common with a